Hi, I'm Dr. Wehrenberg, and I want to talk to you a little bit about an idea in a book called The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Business and Life, and make a connection between what you can learn from looking at habits and the idea of recovery and relapse prevention in addiction. Because I think as a therapist, I'm interested in behavior change as well as I'm interested in emotional life. And this particular book, a new book out by Charles Duhigg, is a volume where he contributes a very clear view of how habits develop, how they can be changed, and why understanding habits matters to us as therapists to help our clients in therapy accomplish their goals. I think that understanding habit has real power in looking at relapse prevention, in particular, to any kind of addiction. Duhigg does a fine job in this book, The Power of Habit, reviewing what's known about the neurobiology of habit formation and why people who understand that can have an easier time making behavior change. His point about habits and its connection to addiction is made best if we first take a little look at the brain's reward center. Deep in the center of your brain, you have a structure called the basal ganglia. That structure has several parts to it, but all the parts together are involved in developing motivation and coordinating movement or habitual behavior with emotion and with motivation. So if you look at what motivates people to learn and do behaviors or form habits, first you have to take a look at motivation. When you use a substance or do a behavior that causes you to feel good, you want to do it again. And that's because there's a neurochemical called dopamine released in the basal ganglia that makes you feel especially good. And it helps your brain remember the I like that part of the behavior. So you do a behavior or you use a substance and you feel good, that's a reward, and you develop the motivation to do the behavior again. That's called positive reinforcement, where you get something good from doing it. Now, different natural, normal, everyday activities cause the release of this neurochemical. Eating a tasty meal, laughing really hard, having a positive sexual experience, exercising, all of these things cause the release of dopamine and make us want to do them again. But substances or activities that cause an intense release of dopamine, even beyond what your brain could do by itself without the assistance of a substance, these can cause an intense release of dopamine and be incredibly rewarding. So when we're developing habits, natural rewards are reinforcing. When we're talking about the habit of drug use, the, if you will, unnatural amount of reward makes them especially reinforced behaviors. So what happens in this a way of developing a habit, habitual use, a habitual behavior, is that we get a sense of reward and we do the behavior again. And sometimes the reinforcement is actually just the relief of some kind of emotional or physical pain. So you can get, that's called negative reinforcement, by the way, where you get relief instead of simple reward. But whatever you did, where you did it, when you did it, who you were with when you did it, how you felt, all of these get structured and put together in the memory of an event. And you try to replace that activity or redo that activity as much as possible. The more you do it, the more you form a habit of doing it. Any consistently rewarding experience can become a habit. And when the reward you get is powerful pleasure or relief, you may develop addiction, which isn't the same as habit exactly, but habit is included in that process. So when Duhigg reviews what happens in habit formation, he's focused first on behavioral habits. And we all have these, and they're all really necessary. You have lots of habits involved in driving a car. You don't need to think about what you're doing. You have habitual behaviors, shifting gears, watching for red lights, etc. Habits can be simple activities like riding a bicycle. Habits can be about how you get up and do your morning routine without thinking about it. The order in which you do toothbrushing or getting dressed. You don't want to have to think about every activity in depth. You want the behavior to be a habit. And Duhigg takes a look at all of the medical research and neuroscience research that demonstrates how the basal ganglia is central to recalling physical patterns of behavior and activity. And some of the research, he looks at what's been known through observation of people who have brain damage. Routines persist even though memory has been damaged. People can sing songs, play musical instruments, and go about the activities of daily life even when they're missing big chunks of memory. Or as dementia occurs, certain habits still persist. Damage to the basal ganglia can result in the loss of routines. That was another bit of research in the 90s, I should say, that was very relevant to looking at the aspect of basal ganglia activity in habit formation and retrieval. But an interesting aspect related to addiction came from a bit of research in 2007, when a researcher at the University of Magdeburg named Muller did an experiment related to addiction that showed even when they could turn off the part of the brain where craving occurs, behavior occurred that was related to the addiction. Obviously, this was done with rats, so we extrapolate from animals to people. But what the extrapolation was is when they could turn off the craving, the behavior to get the substance that the animal was addicted to persisted. And that research was significant to demonstrate that traces of old routines remain even when new routines are developed. And relevant to addiction, a person in recovery who's erasing all those traces of addictive behavior, the trace remains and it's overlaid with new behavior or new habit formation. But it's important to know that habits can be triggered by memories or cues to do the old behavior. If we're going to look at relapse prevention, we want to look at this aspect of habit, that a cue elicits certain behavior. And in addiction recovery, we have to identify cues and then substitute new behaviors. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But what I want to suggest to you also is that when we're learning something new, when we're learning new behavior, we put a lot of brain effort into it. So in addiction recovery, we have to put a lot of attention into the process of learning new behaviors. But as those become habitual, brain activity settles down, we don't have to put so much into it, and the new behavior becomes more automatic. So repetition of new behavior becomes an important part of recovery. Once the routine is established and the reward for doing the routine is consistently there, then your brain starts to anticipate the reward. For example, if you feel very pleased about the way you feel after a vigorous workout at the gym, even thinking about going to the gym, getting ready to do the exercise, your brain will start anticipating, I'm going to feel so good when that's over. And that anticipation helps you complete the activity. But in relation to addiction, this is more like instituting craving, that the minute you start thinking about drug seeking or behavior seeking like gambling, you start to anticipate, boy, am I going to feel good. And that impels you to do the behavior you're trying to get rid of. So an important feature in recovery is to look for every cue that could help a person begin to anticipate that they're going to get a reward. So Duhigg's presentation of habits, why we do what we do in business and life, gives incredible support to the means by which we can develop new habits to replace negative habits. And he very much is able to support in his research on habit formation an important part of recovery. First, you have to find the cue. Those are sometimes subtle reminders to do behaviors. He suggests that it's important to just simply inject, I shouldn't say simply there, what I should say is to look at the cue and then put in new behavior that you have to practice repeatedly until it becomes habitual, looking for the same reward, which is a sense of pleasure or relief from pain. So we don't try to give necessarily a whole new reward system. What we want to take a look at is, if I feel bad and then do a new behavior, I can anticipate feeling good. We get a new system in place. So for a great example of this is, if I'm feeling upset, I call someone on my AA call list, I get some support, I feel better. I begin over and over again to call people for support. Or I go to a meeting. A 12-step meeting is another example of a new behavior in response to a cue that you want relief. And if Duhigg does a wonderful job of explaining, if it were as simple as just inserting a new behavior, then recovery would be simple as well from addiction. But there's an additional component of an issue about why this really can work, which is the idea that you need to believe it. You need to believe that the new behavior is going to work, that it's likely to be helpful to you, that you are going to feel better. You need to then, in helping your clients with recovery issues, be very helpful to them in identifying new behaviors that they believe can work, and then spend a lot of attention on noticing how they feel when they've completed the new behavior. In other words, as part of the process of developing a new behavior in response to a common cue, you want to look at very carefully what the reward is and focus your attention on how good that feels. So find the cue, do a new behavior, look at how it feels and pay careful attention to how rewarding the new behavior is, and work on the belief system that if I keep this going, it's going to help me in my recovery. So, final issue here is thinking about with your clients, the development of habit is part of how you get addicted, but understanding that process is how you can help yourself get recovery from addiction put solidly in place. Thanks for your attention to this blog.